If we were to ask you to name Germany's most important ally during World War II, which nation would spring to mind? Perhaps it'd be Japan, their indomitable Far Eastern friend, or maybe Italy, which not only made massive contributions in the Mediterranean and North Africa, but also contributed around 300,000 troops to the Eastern Front. Certainly, both would be more than understandable answers to this question, most subjective, but cast them aside in your minds for 20 or so minutes, folks, because here's another one for you to consider: Romania. Don't worry, you didn't hear us wrong. We seriously are suggesting that Romania, a nation that many forget even was an Axis power, could well have been Germany's most valuable wartime ally. And we aren't over-exaggerating when we allude to Romania being a forgotten Axis power. For example, in the book Chronology of World War II by Christopher Argyle, Romania receives a whopping 0 mention in its 208 pages, and similarly, the country is never mentioned in the 296 pages of Decisive Battles of World War II by Peter Young either. It does, however, receive a comparatively incalculable single mention in the 212 pages of World War II by Don Nardo. So that's something, right? But bear with us, folks, because while the odds may appear stacked against our claim, we legitimately believe that rather than simply just being another minor Axis power, akin to, say, Thailand or Slovakia, Romania could indeed have been Germany's most important ally, even more so than mighty Japan, and definitely more so than Italy. Intrigued? Well, if you are, don't touch that dial and see if you agree with what we have to say. Since Romania's wartime history is just a tad elusive, let's begin by discussing something fundamental, a foundation of sorts upon which the rest of this video will rest. That being the matter of how Romania even became an Axis power anyway. It all began at the tail of and immediately after World War I, when Romania, as a victorious Allied power, began helping itself to the spoils of war, specifically land, in the forms of regions such as Transylvania, Bessarabia, and Bukovina, all of which it acquired during 1918 through either voluntary unions declared by the ethnic Romanians of those regions or through direct military occupation. This expansion was a double-edged sword, however, because while ethnic Romanians were generally chuffed to bits with the establishment of Greater Romania, as the new borders came to be known, the other groups in those regions, well, they were decidedly unchuffed, to say the least, and typically favoured seceding from Romania to join up with the rest of their people. The Hungarians wanted to join Hungary, the Bulgarians wanted to join Bulgaria, and the Ukrainians wanting to join the Soviet Union, and so on and so forth. This then led to a simmering of ethnic tensions, both internally and externally, as well as was very much the vogue of the day Europe over, the rise of fascist movements within Romania, made up of nationalist ethnic Romanians who were all about Greater Romania's big new borders and would be damned if they were going to let it break up. A notable example of this would be the Iron Guard, which was founded in March 1930 and boasted 272,000 members at its peak. Seeing that all this was rather unideal, to say the least, King Carol II attempted to stabilize the country by establishing a royal dictatorship in 1938. He managed to take control easy enough, but cooling down ethnic tensions proved to be just a tad tricky, and so Romania continued to destabilize. And then, just when things couldn't get any worse, one of those external tensions began to reach its breaking point, as the Soviet Union signed the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact in August 1939 with Nazi Germany, which, thanks to its secret accords for carving up Eastern Europe between them, saw Germany supporting the Soviet claims on Bessarabia. This then emboldened the Soviets to start holding Romania's feet to the fire on the matter, which culminated with them issuing an ultimatum in June 1940 that demanded that both Bessarabia and northern Bukovina be handed over. Romania, with little other option thanks to an impeding Soviet invasion and being left on red by its traditional allies such as France and the United Kingdom, acquiesced to the demands and handed the territory over. But this action had broken the seam of the patchwork quilt that was Greater Romania, and now other irked powers began to appear thick and fast to pull at it until it was threadbare, with northern Transylvania being lost to Hungary through the Second Vienna Award, and southern Dobruja being lost to Bulgaria through the Treaty of Craiova, both in 1940. And if there's one thing fascists really don't like, it's losing territory. So guess what happens next? A coup. It happened in September 1940 and was led by General Ion Antonescu of the army with the support of the Iron Guard, and it succeeded, forcing King Carol II to abdicate in favour of his son, Michael I. It also led to Antonescu establishing a military dictatorship, one hell-bent on regaining lost territory and restoring Greater Romania. Naturally, he would need powerful friends in order to do so, and so, giving his political leanings, he ended up turning to Nazi Germany. This move was nothing if not bitterly ironic, as both the Treaty of Craiova and the Second Vienna Award had been mediated over by Germany. Plus, there was the whole Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact business, and thus the very nation that Romania was now attempting to butter up had been instrumental in it losing much of that territory to begin with. Hitler, for his part, was only too happy to welcome a new member to the burgeoning Axis family, and so, with his blessing, Romania signed the Tripartite Act on the 23rd of November 1940 and formally became an Axis power. And naturally, given the whole premise of this video, Romania got really into it. So now, let's move on and see exactly what it was they did that leads us to the claim they just may have been Hitler's most important ally. Romania was heavily involved in combat on the Eastern Front. In fact, so large was their involvement that during Operation Barbarossa, Romania fielded the third largest Axis, not of the theatre, but period, being larger than Italy, Hungary, Slovakia, Thailand, Croatia, Bulgaria, and Finland, and smaller only than Germany and Japan. We don't know exactly how many troops they committed to the war, as such figures appear not to have survived, but we do know snippets here and there that give us an idea, such as how during Operation Barbarossa they had just under 700,000 troops on the books, as it were, and by 1944, this number had risen to just over 1.2 million. Naturally, with numbers like that, they saw more than their fair share of battles, with a notable early example in which Romanian forces took the lead being the Siege of Odessa, which lasted from August through to October 1941. There, Romanian troops, primarily from the 4th Army with support from the Germans, faced fierce resistance from the Soviet forces entrenched in the heavily fortified city. The Romanian army, commanded by General Nicolae Cuperza, attacked Odessa with a force comprising multiple infantry divisions, cavalry brigades, and the 1st Armoured Division. Despite suffering heavy casualties with over 90,000 Romanian soldiers killed, wounded, or missing, the Romanian forces managed to encircle and eventually capture the city after 73 days of intense fighting. The Romanian army also played a significant role during the Battle of Stalingrad, with the 3rd and 4th Romanian armies tasked with defending the northern and southern flanks of the German 6th Army, respectively. The Romanian 3rd Army, commanded by General Petru Dumitrescu, was positioned along the Don River and comprised several infantry and cavalry divisions, while the 4th Army, under General Constantin Constantinescu Claps, held positions to the south of Stalingrad. Despite being under-equipped, particularly in terms of anti-tank weaponry, the Romanians faced the brunt of the Soviet counteroffensive launched during Operation Uranus on the 19th of November 1942. The 3rd Army held well for a time, but never-ending artillery barrages and tank assaults eventually breached Romanian defences, creating significant gaps that masses of Soviet troops then poured into. The Romanian troops, armed with inadequate 37mm and 47mm anti-tank guns, eventually found themselves having to resort to using grenades, anti-tank mines, and Molotov cocktails to delay the Soviet advance. Despite their valiant efforts, the Romanian lines were overwhelmed by the sheer number of Soviets, and by the 20th, they were fully encircled and cut off from any possible reinforcements. The 4th Army faced similar challenges. Their positions were attacked by overwhelming Soviet forces, leading to the rapid deterioration of their defensive lines. The Romanian 1st Armoured Division attempted to counterattack and link up with the German 22nd Panzer Division, but they encountered stiff Soviet resistance and numerous counterattacks, which halted their advance and forced them to retreat, lest they face total decimation. The encircled Romanian units, particularly the General Lascar group, formed from the remnants of several infantry divisions, found themselves in desperate conditions. Major General Mihail Lascar's group, numbering around 40,000 men, was surrounded and faced continuous Soviet attacks. Despite running out of food and ammunition, the group managed to resist until, in desperation, they went for it and attempted to break out. Only a small number of soldiers succeeded in escaping the encirclement, with the rest being either killed or captured. When all was said and done, Romania had suffered 158,854 men dead, wounded, and missing, just as Stalingrad alone. Romania also got involved in naval operations, albeit to only a minor degree, as their navy wasn't exactly big, consisting of a sum of a total of 4 destroyers, 1 frigate, 5 obsolete sea-going ironclads, 5 torpedo boats, 3 Coast Guard cruisers, and 8 submarines. To give you an example of the kind of thing they were involved with, consider the defense at Constanta during the Soviet raid on the 26th of June 1941. There, German coastal batteries, along with Romanian destroyers Marashti and Regina Maria, repelled the Soviet attack and sunk the Soviet destroyer Moskva. Nothing huge, their operations were certainly no Battle of the Atlantic, but they were typically executed competently for the size of their navy. If you're listening to this and thinking that we're describing a fighting force that was thoroughly mid, one which was by no means great, but certainly not terrible, you'd be absolutely correct. And this perspective on Romania's capabilities is also found in many primary sources, such as the memoirs of German Field Marshal Erich von Manstein, who worked closely alongside Romanian forces on the Eastern Front. Let's look at what he had to say. One of the detracting points of his mid-takeaway concerned the ability of the Romanian army to respond to advanced training. Quote, "As for the army, there is no doubt that it had considerable weaknesses. Although the soldier, who was usually of peasant origin, was modest in his wants and usually a capable, brave fighter, the possibilities of training him as an individual fighting man who could think for himself in action, let alone as a non-commissioned officer, were to a great extent limited by the low standard of general education in Romania." On a related note, he also didn't have great things to say about the military pedigree of the Romanian army. Quote, "Because they had no war experience, the combat training of the Romanians fell short of the exigencies of modern warfare. This led to unnecessary losses, which in turn was bound to affect morale." Despite those critiques, however, he also had plenty of complimentary remarks. Quote, "Despite all the defects and reservations mentioned above, however, the Romanian troops performed their duty as best they could. Above all, they always readily submitted to German military leadership and did not, like other allies of ours, put matters of prestige before material necessity." You see what we mean now? Manstein's view on the Romanian army very much matches the they're alright, we guess, angle we have presented thus far in this video, thereby implying our perspective is a wise one. If this has you scratching your head a bit and screaming at the screen with words to the extent of, "But, Jake, you oh so wise and handsome purveyor of military history, you said Romania was meant to be Germany's most important ally. How does that work if they were so middling?" The answer to that quandary is really simple. The rest of Germany's allies were either too small to be of any great importance, think Croatia or Slovakia, or they were simply so useless that they proactively worsened Germany's war situation, think Italy and Japan. Thus, Romania, as the only significant-sized ally that seems to have actually been a boon to them at all, kind of wins by default. Let's qualify this a bit now. Now, we're sure we don't have to explain why Italy was a useless ally to you at all. If you're unsure, picture Hitler trying to balance multiple plates while also trying to run around with toilet roll wiping Mussolini for him, you get the idea. But our inclusion of Japan as a useless ally might sound weird to you, as they were famously a bit nails after all, what with the whole invading basically the whole of East Asia at the same time in December 1941 thing. However, it isn't Japan's war-fighting capability we're assessing here. It's what use the absolute unitness was to Germany as an aligned power, which in real terms was the sum total of bugger all. The shipment of strategic materials here and there, the occasional tarty torpedo blueprint sent over by submarine, and that's about it. But wait, it gets worse, because not only did Japan not really give Germany anything of use, they also gave it one thing it really didn't need: war with the US. Not sure what we're getting at? Well, let us ask you this. Why did Germany declare war on the United States? The answer? Out of solidarity with Japan after its attack on Pearl Harbor. See where we're going here? You see, if Germany hadn't had that obligation, there's a chance that sufficient politicking could have been done to keep the US neutral towards Germany and thus stop its troops from ever pouring onto the beaches of Normandy in 1944. And safe to say that would have made a bit of a bigger difference to the outcome of the war than a few shipments of Malayan rubber, wouldn't you agree? And thus, through process of elimination, Romania stands proud as the best German ally of World War II. But wait folks, there's more, because what we've launched for your screens thus far is but one line of our argumentation, and we still have another arrow in our quiver to send your way. Something Romania gave to Germany that was more valuable than any bomb, bullet, blade, or bloke: oil. Romania, in case you didn't know, was, and still is, a country that sits atop a metric ton of oil, to use the technical term, and this, naturally, proved to be just a bit of a big deal to the German war machine. Germany, being a country that, in stark contrast to Romania's ton of oil, sits atop, basically, all of the stuff. The importance of Romanian oil cannot be overstated. While never fully dependent upon Romanian oil because it did find other supplies, the amount supplied to Germany was so large, but there's no two ways about it. Without Romanian oil, there would have been no German war as we understand it today. Simple as. Allow us to explain in more detail. Before the war, Germany recognized its vulnerability due to a lack of domestic oil reserves and began to look for alternative sources to meet its burgeoning military needs. The rise of a synthetic fuel produced in Germany, particularly through a process called coal liquefaction, literally the turning of solid coal into liquid oil, helped alleviate some of these concerns. It was not enough to cover the vast fuel demands of the Nazi war machine. Therefore, Germany turned to Romania, which had extensive oil fields, particularly in the Ploiești region. During the early years of the war, Romania produced approximately 8 million barrels of oil annually just for export to Germany. As the war progressed and the demands on Germany's military intensified, the importance of Romanian oil only grew, and by 1941, Germany had managed to stockpile an estimated 56 million barrels of petroleum, with a substantial portion coming from Romanian oil fields. Romania's contribution to the Axis war effort also extended beyond merely supplying oil, as they also heavily shouldered the burden of defending it, as exemplified by Operation Tidal Wave on August 1943, a mission led by the US that saw 177 B-24 Liberator bombers target the oil refineries at Ploiești. There, they found that the Romanians had so heavily defended it, specifically with 36 heavy anti-aircraft batteries, 16 light and medium anti-aircraft batteries, and 57 fighters, that the effort turned into a devastating loss. One that saw 53 B-24s shot down and a further 55 damaged. The operation, which had aimed to reduce the facility's production by 60 to 70%, had managed barely a fraction of that, all thanks to the Romanians' own defensive efforts. Naturally, however, as the war went on and bombing efforts only intensified, Romanian oil production would eventually be hit hard, but we can hardly blame them for that. By that point in the war, there was so many bombers in the sky that they found themselves but a mere David desperately trying to fend off a Goliath. All in all then, you can see why oil is the tip of our argumentative spear in the video. Sure, Germany was never fully dependent upon Romanian oil, but it's certainly a fact that Germany's early war offensive successes and later long-fought defensive efforts were all made possible by Romanian oil. And it's certainly not inconceivable to imagine that without that supply, things would have gone very differently. Take just the Battle of France as an example. A battle that was won with vast movements of oil-thirsty tanks making long, deep and flexible penetrations against the enemy. Take out a big chunk of Germany's oil supply and that simply wouldn't have gone the same way, would it? And that brings us to the end of the video. And while we're certainly not bold enough to proclaim the argument that we have presented today as the truth, we certainly do feel bold enough to say it's one you ought to consider and not dismiss outright. While not an equivalent force to Germany by any means, in Romania, Germany found an ally that provided it with a fighting force that it seems fair to call adequate or okay at worst, one that wasn't perfect but did the job, as it were. And further to that, it gained the oil needed to keep its war machine running. Compare that to Italy, which gave Germany little but a pain in the a military that constantly needed bailing out and provided minimal strategic resources in return, and Japan, which sent them the odd shipment of rubber from occupied Malaya, and in return dragged them into a war with the US, courtesy of the attack on Pearl Harbor. And yeah, suddenly Romania's contributions look pretty good, don't they? Or, to simplify, it's less that we think Romania was an amazing ally per se, and more that it was the only major ally that seems to have been an overall boon to Germany's war effort at all. A flawed diamond amidst a pile of coal.